Good afternoon, fellow programmers. Thanks for joining me. I'm T-Pain, and welcome to Let's Learn Python. Feel free to use the skip ahead feature on the right-hand side to jump to any specific sections or examples. Today we'll be using Python 2.7.6 and Python 3.3.3. You can download those from python.org/getit. Today we'll be covering user interfaces with PyQt. This will build heavily on past lessons, so feel free to go back and watch them again if anything is unclear. Alright, so here's a quick demo of the tool that we're going to be developing. It's just a simple user interface right here with a button in the middle of it that says print ham. And what does it do? It prints ham! Oh! It also scales, and when we close this, it'll actually close the whole application. Like so. Alright, so let's dive right in. So what is a UI? What is a user interface? A user interface is a French-Canadian boat that sank in the distant future year of 1846. The leprechauns piloting the ship were destroyed by the ghost of Bill Murray. Okay, enough joking. That was silly. For those who don't know, a user interface is how you interact with a program visually. So it includes buttons, menus, images, whatever pops up that you can click on and interact with. If you ever open up let's say Firefox or After Effects or Photoshop, all these little buttons, this whole thing is a user interface. It's all graphical, it's all got like little areas we can click on, like open up menus and whatnot. That's really it. It's just that simple. So how do we prepare ourselves for this lesson? Well, first you're going to download Qt Creator from the Qt website. There will be a link in the description for this, but you're going to go to qt-project.org/downloads. And then right here is the main download page. And then you can select from any of these first few downloads that'll have the most up-to-date software that we'll be using. I personally recommend the online installer because it's much smaller download initially, and it'll actually do most of the installation and selection stuff for you running in the background, rather than having to download it forever and then install it. I apologize, I am slightly sick for this recording, so thank you for bearing with me. So the program within Qt Creator we're going to be using is called Qt Designer. No other programs really are we going to be using. Not even the one that makes scrambled eggs. Another terrible joke. I'm full of terrible jokes. If you have Autodesk's Maya software installed on your computer, then you can actually go ahead and skip this step because Maya actually has Qt Designer installed with it. So if we were to go into our navigation folder, go to Drive, and then go to Program Files, Autodesk, Maya, Binaries, and under Binaries, if we scroll down, we will find designer.exe. This is what we're going to be actually using. But for those that don't have Maya, you can actually download it from the website as before. Next, we're going to download and install PyQt. PyQt is what's going to allow us to interface between Qt and Python. So up here on this download page is the actual source files. I would not recommend downloading these if you're on a Windows machine. Instead, scroll down just a bit and you'll find these binary installers for Windows. This will make your installation process much easier. Otherwise, you can use these packages right here if you're on a Linux or Unix or Mac machine. And after you download these, it's as simple as running a command that's Python, and then you designate the file. Once you're like in the current directory that it's at, it's just the config -ng.py. That's the file that you're going to be running, and it's just that simple. And it should take care of the rest for you. Be sure to check the documentation though in the README file of these downloaded files. Go ahead and pause the video right now to take a moment to download these and install. Okay, so now that you have these installed, let's go ahead and fire up Qt Designer. And again, you can find that under here, under the Maya folder, or you can actually go to where it's installed under your C drive, under Qt 5.2.1, and then either one of these has the binary file. I'm going to go ahead and use the 32-bit binary designer exe right here. Okay, so now that we have this squished to the side a little bit, this is Qt Designer. This is what's going to allow us to design our interfaces. So let's go ahead and go under File, New. You should have this pop up initially. And there's only two guys I think you should focus on right now. That's the main window and the widget. These two guys are basically what you're going to be using for the most part when designing your own custom interfaces. If you want to have buttons start at the bottom, there's these presets or templates at the top that are like buttons on bottom, buttons on right, and you can see a preview of them on the right hand side. And then design without dialog without buttons. But for the most part, we're just going to go ahead and stick with these. So we're going to go ahead and select widget, because the widget is basically the simplest form. The difference between widget and main window is that the main window has a menu bar at the top. Widget does not, making it simpler to work with. So let's go ahead and select widget and click create. So here we've got our very first template. I'm going to go ahead and walk you through the user interface for Qt Designer just briefly. On the left side, we have our basic creation tools for all the stuff that we're actually going to be putting into the main widget itself. On the top right, we have the Object Inspector, which will be basically listing out everything within the widget itself. So if we put any buttons or layouts or anything, it'll appear on the top right. And then on the right hand side, we're going to have the Property Editor. And this will allow us to edit any properties of buttons we have selected for naming, for settings, for size, for stuff like that. Down below, we have the Resource Manager. This guy I don't ever use, so we're just going to go ahead and ignore him for now. So let's go ahead and create a super simple example. So before we actually get started, I want to show you something real quick. Right here are the buttons. I'm going to go ahead and drag on a few, and you don't actually have to do this yourself, but I want you to notice something. So when I run this, typically you want your tools to be scalable. You want them to actually shift with the windows. Like these buttons, I would want to like align properly with the windows and maybe stay at the same proportions apart. And the way that you accomplish this is with layouts, which are on the top left of your widget box. Now, right now, nothing is aligning properly. Nothing is scaling properly. So we're going to go ahead and close that. And I'm going to go ahead and delete these buttons. So what you do is you select if you want a vertical or horizontal layout. For now, since we're making such a simple layout, we're just going to go ahead and drop a simple vertical layout in there. And then right-click anywhere in this empty space of the widget. And then down at the bottom, you're going to go to Layout, and then we can just select Layout horizontally or vertically. Doesn't really matter. And now notice what happens. This little tiny box that's our actual horizontal layout, what happened is it's actually fitted to the window. Okay, this is important because now for our next step, we're going to go ahead and drag and drop this under buttons, a push button into the layout. All right, drop it in there. And now to simply test out your widget window, another way to do that is if you go under Form and then go under Preview right there. This is Control R to preview, and just press that and you can actually preview your widget. And now notice what happens. As I scale this widget around, the button is properly aligned and expanding and contracting as I scale the window. Very, very slick. So let's go ahead and X out of that, and we're going to change a few properties on our button. So to change the name of the button, we can simply double click on there. And we're just going to type, guess what? Print space ham, because that's what it's going to be doing. And then we're going to go ahead and change the actual name of the button within the code. So in the property editor on the right hand side, you can go under object name, and then here we can actually name our object whatever we want. So I'm going to type print ham underscore btn. So that way we know it's going to be tied to the print ham function. Okay? And we're going to go ahead and leave everything else the same. So now that we've done all this, it's a perfect time to actually save out our widget. So you can go in a menu and then click save, or you can just press Ctrl S and it'll bring up the window. Now I'm going to go into our lesson, and I'm going to go ahead and create a folder called My First UI. And within that folder, I'm going to just go ahead and save this as a print ham underscore widget. Okay, and save it. Beautiful. And also one last thing that I want to do before we exit out of this is this name up top is it can be changed if you'd like. So what we do is we're going to go ahead and select the top form. We're going to go ahead and select the top widget. You can select it in here in the Object Inspector. You can also select other things if you want to avoid clicking on them directly. This makes it much easier to select things when you get a whole bunch of stuff in there. So go ahead and select that top widget. And we're going to go ahead and change this title of the window. And the way we do that is not by changing this form right here, but instead you twirl down the widget. For instance, if we go ahead and change this, we can type ASDF, and it's not going to actually change the window name. So let's go ahead and undo that. Instead, we go down widget, and widget is where we're actually going to be able to change the name. And if we scroll down under window title, right here is where we can actually name it. And I'm just going to name it Super Ham because I love ham. All right. And then press enter, and now we have our Super Ham window titled. Perfect. Go ahead and save that with Control S. And now I'm going to go ahead and minimize Qt. Open up Sublime Text as my editor of choice. If whatever your text editor is, go ahead and feel free to open that. And now I'm going to go ahead and do something a little strange. You don't have to do this if you don't want, but if you go ahead and select this file and drag it into Sublime Edit or whatever editor you have, you'll actually reveal that it is XML code. Now this is not really important, but it's just interesting to know that XML is how UI files are actually being laid out. So if you ever need to change the XML code, you can actually see it's pretty digestible. It's much like HTML code. So you're like, okay, this doesn't look at all like I can adjust it with Python very easily. Like I might have to do like a lot of scripting if I want to manipulate this. Well, that's why we downloaded PyQt. PyQt allows us to convert this XML code into a much more digestible Python code. Now the way that we're going to do this is we're going to actually open up our command prompt. So if you're on a Linux or Unix machine, you'd go ahead and open up terminal, and the quickest way to get there that I know of, press Windows key R, and then type CMD, and then it'll open up this command prompt. So first thing we want to do is we want to go ahead and change the directory to this folder that we have here. And so we're just going to quickly select the folder destination, copy it, and then back in our command prompt, we're going to type CD in order to change the directory. So to type CD, and then you're going to go ahead and paste it by right-clicking and click paste. And then after that, press enter, and it'll change the directory. Now that we're in the directory, we're going to go ahead and convert this UI file to a Python file. And the way that we do that is by typing PyUIC4. So that's basically Python UI converter 4. If you're on a Linux or Unix-based machine, what you're going to type next is actually the input file .ui, and then type the output file that you want to name it. So this would be output _ui.py or something like that, right? It's important to note that it would be this little greater than sign to convert it. However, on Windows machines, it's slightly different. So we're going to go ahead and type a flag, so -o, and the space, and now we're going to name the actual output file. So I'm going to name it print ham _widget _ and then UI.py. This is just so I know that this is an actual UI file that I'm creating. And then after that, you're going to type space, and then you're going to actually name the file that that you're sourcing from. So this is going to be print ham _widget.ui, and then type enter, and then it goes ahead and does it. And then here in the Explorer, we can actually see that it created that file. Perfect. All right, let's go ahead and now open that file that we just created, the UI.py file, and drag and drop it into Sublime Text. All right, so now what do we have? Well, first off, the most important thing to note is that it gives us this little warning and says, hey, any changes you make to this file will be lost, because every time you convert from a UI file to a PY file, it's basically going to override the previous Python file. So any changes that you make here should be on the final version. You may find that plugging that code in again and again is a pain in the butt. So what you can do as an option is actually create a script that will go in there and do it for you as a way to automate the process rather than having to do it again and again by hand. It'll increase your productivity, and it doesn't take that long to do. And that is actually why I've included it as one of the final challenges. Let's just comb through this code just a little bit. First thing it says is PyQt4, that's the main module. We're going to import Qt Core and Qt GUI. These are the main two guys that you're going to be using the majority of the time. And then after this is going to have just some basic boilerplate code, so that your code that you're going to see over and over and over again. After that, you're going to see UI_form. This is the name of our widget that we had in Qt. It throws in the UI underscore ahead of it. So if we'd named this kick-ass or whatever it was titled, then it would have appeared right here. So after that, Qt does a whole bunch of other stuff of like formatting it properly, inserting, like you'll see a push button, you'll see a box layout. These are all for objects that are created. for all our widgets. And then down here, it actually like orders them back like after creating them. So it's adding the button to the vertical layout, and then the vertical layout to the horizontal layout, etc. And then down here at the bottom, it just sets the title of it, and then it sets the button text in the retranslate UI function, and that's about it. Okay, so now we're actually going to begin binding that button to some functionality, and it's just going to be really simple functionality. So we're going to go ahead and in the retranslate UI at the very end, what we're going to type is self.printham_btn, which is basically what we have up above, and then type clicked.connect, open parentheses, self.printham, and that's it. This self.printham is going to be a function we're going to define right now. So after that, we're going to go ahead and indent a few times and then create another function right below it. Notice that it's going to be within the class UI form that we have up above. So type def printham, open parentheses, self, close parentheses, colon, enter, and then just type print, and then open parentheses, and then type quotations, and ham, exclamation point, save. Next, I'm going to paste in some code. So this is just the generic, like if we're in the main module, then we're going to go ahead and run the application. And then first, we're going to actually call this QApplication function, and that's going to basically be the whole application itself, and store it in this app variable. And then we're going to actually create the form and show the form before we actually execute the function. This is just the order that things happen in. And then finally, we have system.exit so that we can close the application at the very end when the application itself is closed. And that's just how, so everything shuts down nicely. All right, so let's go ahead and save it and press Control B to make sure that it doesn't have any errors. Oh, and it did catch me on one error in that it says namesys is not defined. And that's just because we're accessing a module that hasn't been imported. So scroll up to the top, and then right below the first import expression, type in import sys, save it, and let's run it again, see if there are any more errors. It's saying UI form has no attribute show. Okay, so something that PyQt doesn't quite do right is that when this class is created, this UI_form class is created, it's inheriting from object, but that's not the correct class it should be inheriting from. Instead, we want it to inherit from the QWidget class. So the way we're going to do that is type Q lowercase t and then GUI with a capital G, and then type dot widget, QWidget with the Q and W capitalized, widget. So then after that, we're going to go ahead and set up the constructor function, which we all know to be underscore init underscore self, and it's not going to take in any arguments other than self. And then after that, it's gonna we're going to go ahead and access Qt GUI again, dot QWidget, and then just type dot underscore init underscore open close parentheses with self inside. And then after that, we're going to call the function right down below that we've defined here, the setup UI. We're just going to go ahead and call that function right afterwards. Dot setup UI, open close parentheses, and we're just going to go ahead and pass in self. Self is going to be passed into form, and that's about it. Go ahead and save it, and then let's go ahead and test that. And we have no errors, so that's perfect. It doesn't actually run on its own by like this. So what you have to do is you have to go ahead and run it on its own by accessing the file in your folder. Go under My First UI, and then just double click the file. Another option that you have is you can actually go to the command prompt, or you can go to terminal and then access the function that way. And here we have our very first working UI. And now when I click this button, notice it prints ham. Beautiful, and it works over and over and over again. Also, we can go ahead and scale it however we want. Everything works properly. Beautiful. And then when we're done, we can simply X out of this, and it'll close the whole application itself. Beautiful. All right, so we developed our very first UI. Excellent job. So a few more things about Qt Designer. So the first thing I want to cover is the layouts. There are only two layouts that I find myself ever using. The grid layouts and the form layouts I don't ever use. It's mainly just the vertical and the horizontal. And it all depends on how you want to have stuff. Now it's very easy to add in more stuff. So if I wanted a extra button in here, add it. Now it's adding to a vertical layout. So what if I wanted to have buttons side by side within this layout? Well, that's very easy. You just throw in a horizontal layout first, and it'll fill up as much room as it can. And then we can throw in more and more buttons in here, and it'll start stacking them side by side. Really, really cool stuff. So that's about all you need to know with layouts, is that you can just keep adding them in as much as you want. And again, to adjust the properties on any given object, you just select it, and then here in the properties editor, you'll be able to change stuff. So if you don't want to have 6 as the amount of space between these buttons, you can change that to 3, and it'll change here, and it'll just adjust that, or we can change it to 30, and that'll really add some space. Yeah. The next thing I want to show you is spacers. These guys are very cool. And what they'll do is they'll kind of squash and stretch to make sure that everything's aligned as much as possible. So if I throw this horizontal spacer right in here, he'll take up a set amount of room. As much room, actually, as these buttons are taking up. The only thing he's doing is that he's trying to like stretch out as much as possible, acting as kind of a spring, which is why he has that icon. And the same works for this vertical spacer. If I throw that in here up above, it'll try to take up as much room as it can. And you can adjust the properties of this guy. Again, in the properties editor, it'd be like, oh, his orientations, I want it to be horizontal instead. Or instead of expanding, I want it to be like a minimum size, or of the maximum size, or something like that. You can always adjust these however you want. And then you can click the little arrow on the right hand side to reset. So in the buttons menu, you have radio buttons, which are exactly what you think they are, just simple radio buttons. And then if you want to have like a simple little dot menu, you can throw in this guy. This guy's great for, like, when you have file dialog boxes come up, you can click on that guy. If you want an OK and cancel button, like ready to go, these guys are packaged together with the button box. And so there's those two. Then this command line button is just like a really ugly menu that pops up. So if I go ahead and add this right there, you'll see that guy shows up like that. And then you have checkboxes, and that's exactly what you think it is. And then after that, you have like views. I never use these guys. Instead, I use widgets because they're very itemized and cool. So I'm going to drag this down to add some more room. So let's go ahead and add a list widget. And a list widget is basically, if I double click on it, it'll bring up this little box, and I can just click and add items, and then we can always name them however we want, and click OK. And now we have this list of items. It's exactly what you think it is. So it's a list of items, and they can be rearranged however you want. You can click and drag, or no, you can't click and drag. You can click these little arrows and move stuff up or down. You can always adjust the properties on individual items to make one bold or make them not. Yeah. And let's go ahead and delete that. And then we also have our tree widget. I found myself using this a lot too. So if we wanted to, we can add a bunch of columns and stuff, and then we can add in items within that columns. So there they are. They're all scaled up, and yeah, you can double click and edit those item names. Also, what you can do with this is you can add individual items, so sub items, which is cool, and we can stretch that out to see all those items. Go ahead and click OK. And yeah. Outside of that, you have a whole bunch of other guys, and I encourage you to actually like sit down and play with all these guys to figure out what they do. I don't have time to cover everything, but you can figure out what most of this stuff does. You guys are smart people. Other things I use commonly are the labels, and this label is exactly what you think it is. It's just like a simple little text thing, and you can type in whatever you want. So if you want to label something, you can put in that guy. The other guys I use a lot are the horizontal lines and vertical lines, and these are just like nice little separators. That's all they are. You just kind of separate stuff out. So if I go ahead and click Control R to run it, we still have our print hand button up there. We have items up here that we can select. Sometimes you can actually move them around. And then you have your radio buttons, your toolbox buttons, checkbox, command link, other buttons, other layouts and stuff like that. All very, very cool stuff, very powerful. So Qt Designer is excellent for designing your own custom tools and user interfaces. In the next lesson, I'll be covering how to actually integrate this with OpenGL to create some really kick-ass stuff. So today I showed you some of the absolute astonishing power that you have when combining Python, PyQt, and Qt Designer to design user interfaces. Really, really slick stuff for developing your own tools, for developing user interfaces and design applications and whatever you need to do. As you begin to develop your own tools and applications, you may be searching for resources and not know where to go. I'd suggest Google searching whatever it is that you're curious about. This is the main site that you'd be using. It's through Nokia, I believe. And yeah, you can just search on the right hand side in the search box for anything, and you should be able to find most everything you need. So another option that you have in trying to figure out what functionality triggers what, because for buttons it will be like the clicked will be the main action that you use to trigger events, but for other buttons like checkboxes or radio buttons, you may want to figure out what enables what. And so one of the ways that you could figure that out is actually if you press F4 on the keyboard while in Qt Designer, it will toggle into a different mode that will allow you to bind two events together. And when you click and drag from one object to the next, it'll bring up an object box. And here we can see all the actions that are going to be triggered by one button to another, or whatever actions I want to bind functions to. It's going to be listed here. So again, thanks so much for watching. Great job keeping up. Definitely take a few minutes to investigate these final challenges, as you are a brilliant programmer, and I'm sure it'll be a piece of cake to you. I will not be posting the solutions to these problems because I really want you to develop your own skills and your own solutions. There isn't always a correct answer. Please leave me a comment below if this helped you at all. Please do me a huge favor and subscribe to my channel. It would really mean a lot to me. Also hit the like button to show some love. And thank you so much for your support and keep the dream alive.